Strange Case of Tony Horton. The story of Tony Horton, the young and talented slugger for the Red Sox and the Indians, is ultimately a tragic one from a baseball perspective. Just entering his prime seasons at the age of 25, he was forced to leave the game because of an emotional disorder. Untimely, he never returned. Piecing together his story is not easy, because the person who knows the story the best, Tony Horton, is keeping it to himself. Horton later said he did not play baseball until he was 10 or 11 years old. His friends were playing, so he decided to try to catch up. His father did not play, but he read him books on hitting and fielding, and taught his son. Ultimately, Horton was a basketball and baseball star at the University of Los Angeles, one of the best athletes ever to come out of the city by all accounts. On the hardwood, he averaged 27.3 points per game. He was named Los Angeles City Player of the Year in 1962. Other notables who had won this prestigious award were future NBA players Joe Caldwell, Willie Knowles, and Gail Goodrich, as well as Earl Batty, a future all-star catcher for the Minnesota Twins. In baseball, Tony was a shortstop, starred in American Legion Ball, and played for the championship Culver City team in the 1961 Connie Mack World Series. The story of his signing with the Red Sox was told around Fenway Park for years. Scout Joe Stevenson strongly recommended him, despite the fact the 17-year-old Horton had broken his leg his senior year in basketball and played only a few Connie Mack games that summer. Horton was ready to attend the University of Southern California in the fall on a basketball scholarship, so the Red Sox needed to decide before classes started in late September. He and his parents were flown to Fenway Park for a tryout in front of Red Sox farm director Neil Mahoney and assistants Ed Kenny and Milt Bowling. Tony Colignero, a local 17-year-old slugger who the Red Sox also wanted to sign, was there as well. The two Tonys pitched to each other. According to Kenny, telling the Sporting News 2 years later, Horton hit Colignero's first pitch into the center field seats, perhaps 430 feet away. Not bad for a 17-year-old. And the second pitch was driven to right field over the two bullpens. To the day of my death, I'll never forget it, said Kenny. Kenny looked at others and said, "That's enough for me," and walked into the clubhouse. The deal was struck was for a reported $138,000, being a combination of bonus money and enough to cover 4 years of tuition. Horton enrolled at USC anyway, and began taking one semester of classes every off-season. By 1969, he had just 2 semesters shy of his degree in business administration. Horton attended his first spring training with the Red Sox in Scottsdale, Arizona in 1963, working a lot with former Red Sox star Ted Williams, but played sparingly that spring for the big club before being farmed out. After a 1963 season in which he hit .283 with 76 runs, 19 doubles, 4 triples, 21 homers, 88 runs batted in for Waterloo, the Midwest League, he was welcomed back to spring training by the Red Sox the following year. Horton's 88 RBIs for Waterloo tied him for the league lead with Tommy Reynolds, a future major leaguer with the A's, Mets, Angels, and Brewers. Entering the 1964 season, the Red Sox were excited about their 2 young teenage sluggers, Horton and Colignero. Both were right-handed hitters, hitting outfielders with just 1 year of minor league ball behind them, but both were considered candidates to make the club out of the spring. A rule of the time dictated that only one first-year player could be optioned out without being subject to the draft, so it was guaranteed that one of the Tonys would make the club. The 2 players were not just rivals, they became instant friends, roommates in the spring, and constant companions away from the park. Colignero, in his 1970 autobiography, tells of many nights with Horton chasing women, with quite a bit of success apparently. In a preseason game on March 28, 1964, both Horton and Colignero hit home runs to lead the Red Sox to a 12-10 victory over the Los Angeles Angels. Colignero and Horton were presented with trophies as co-rookies of the spring training by the Charles Club of Scottsdale. In the end, Colignero's edge was that he was considered the better outfielder, an area where the Red Sox needed the most help. Horton was playing first more and more, and would ultimately be shifted there. As the eventual successor to Dick Stewart, he was optioned to Reading of the Eastern League at the end of spring camp. Horton hit well for Reading. He has good power to all fields, and he goes with the pitch more than Clignero does. Horton is the prototypical slugger, 6'3", 210 pounds of muscle. Horton's major league debut came at Dodger Stadium on July 31st, starting in left field against the hometown Los Angeles Angels. Facing Aubrey Gatewood, he grounded out his first time up, but singled in the fourth inning and scored his first major league run moments later on Eddie Broussard's double. Every run counted. The final was Boston 4, Los Angeles 3. Horton was the Red Sox starting left fielder for most of the month of August. At Kaminsky Park on August 8th, Horton hit his first major league homer off Fred Talbot of the Chicago White Sox. The Red Sox lost the game 9-2. In 126 at-bats, this would be his only homer of the year. He hit safely in 9 of his first 10 games, hitting .395 over that stretch. He was unsteady in left field, a position he had not played in Reading, but he had gotten his feet wet in Major League Ball, and the future looked bright. On November 29, 1964, the Red Sox traded first baseman Dick Stewart to the Phillies, opening up the first base job for Horton, if he could claim it. In the event, new manager Billy Herman chose to give the job to veteran Lee Thomas, and Horton began the season with AAA International League. Horton was hitting .301 for Toronto in early '65. June, when Red Sox left fielder Gary Geiger broke his hand. The Red Sox recalled Horton to play first base temporarily, moving Thomas back to left field. Horton stuck with the team for the rest of the year, eventually playing first base against left-handers, and he hit a very solid .294 with 7 homers in 60 games. There was one stretch in which he truly made a difference. On August 31st, his 10th homer beat the Senators. On September 8th, he homered again, in the 10th, beating the Indians. On September 14th, in another game against Cleveland, he tied the game in the bottom of the 9th, setting the stage for a walk-off 13-inning home run by Carl Yastrzemski. In 1965, the Red Sox dealt Thomas to the Braves, and Herman announced that Horton would be his first baseman. Ironically, he ultimately fell victim to the Red Sox' successful youth movement. After starting the first 4 games of the 1966 season and playing in 2 others, he was sent back to Toronto after hitting a disappointing .136. The reason for the quickly terminated trial was the brilliant hitting and fielding of rookie George Scott, who won the job and ended up making the All-Star team. After being sent down to Toronto, Horton played 133 games and hit .297 with power, as evidenced by his 26 home run. Although Horton was still just 22 in the 1967 season, he was now playing behind another young player fresh off the All-Star appearance. Nonetheless, new manager Dick Williams, who had managed Horton in Toronto for much of the past 2 seasons, was high on Horton and kept him on the club to open the '67 season. In fact, many observers of the team felt Horton might force Scott to switch position. After 2 months, Tony was mainly pinch hitting, but hitting .308. With the pennant race up for grabs, manager Dick Williams implored GM Dick O'Connell to secure another starting pitcher. On June 4th, the Red Sox traded Horton and Don Demeter to Cleveland for Gary Bell. The Red Sox would go on to win the pennant by 1 game over the Twins and Tigers and 3 over the White Sox. Meanwhile, Horton was given the starting first base job in Cleveland, and he kept it. In 363 at-bats, he had 35 runs, 10 homers, 44 ribbies, while batting .281. With an on-base percentage of .321 and a slugging average of .421 for the first time. Horton no longer had to spend the offseason worried about his position on the team. The 23-year-old slugger could look forward to many years of success. In 1968, an extremely difficult year for hitters, Tony led the Indians with 14 homers, 59 RBIs, while hitting .249 in 133 games. He missed 3 weeks in midsummer when he injured his knee, but otherwise he was out there almost every day. The following season, in 1969, the 24-year-old slugger had his best season, belting 27 home runs, driving in 93. while hitting .278, all team leading figures. Even when Tony was described as extremely intense, a perfectionist who was never happy with his performance. In a June 29, 1968 story in the Sporting News, Tony admitted he was driven to succeed in anything he did, and he realized it was a problem. Recalling his years in Boston, Tony said, "If you're actually afraid of missing a ball or having a bad night, you're going to worry and press, and all you can do is get worse." In 1970, the stress of the game grew more difficult for Horton. After a 3-homer game against the Yankees on May 24th, the Indians lost. Horton was visibly down on himself for his failure to deliver in his last time up, angrily calling himself a blockhead. He did not homer again for 3.5 weeks. He did go 4 for 5 with a grand slam on June 21st and hit for the cycle against the Orioles on July 2nd. On June 24th against the Yankees, Steve Hamilton, Horton swung and missed on one of Hamilton's famed eephus pitches, the so-called folly floaters, then fouled the second one to the catcher. Returning to the dugout, Horton threw his cap and bat into the air and crawled the last few steps to the dugout. The crowd roared, and everyone assumed it was a joke. Later, people wondered if it was. In early August, that briefly stumping Horton began to be booed by the home fans, but he turned the crowd around with a home run. Afterward, Tony admitted being bothered by the booing. He worked himself tirelessly to overcome his hitting drought and reportedly stopped eating and drinking before finally suffering what was later believed to be a nervous breakdown sometime after his last game, which was on August 28th. The Los Angeles Times on September 9th reported that Horton was sent home to Santa Monica due to physical exhaustion. The slump was just a slump, though by season's end, Tony had hit .269 with 17 home runs in 115 games. Numbers very much in line with his fine statistics in 68 and 69. Throughout the offseason, the Indians and everyone else believed that Horton was going to be a big part of the team again in 1971. It was therefore a surprise when the team announced on January 21st, 1971, that Horton would miss spring training and likely the entire season with an emotional disorder. He had been hospitalized since September. His father, Troy, insisted that he was doing well, denied any speculation that his career was over. He reported that the doctors thought he needed some time off, but that he would be ready to play again in 1972. Before the 72 season, the Indians' general manager Gabe Paul visited Horton in Santa Monica, reported that Tony was doing fine, though not yet ready to make a comeback. In July, Horton told the Sporting News that he was 100% recovered, but not really thinking about baseball. He had a job at the stock exchange, played some golf, and read a lot. For all practical purposes, that would seem to be the last anyone heard from Horton. There have been many theories as to what happened to him, but he has not talked about his career and his ending in the ensuing 35 years. Author Bill Madden attempted to interview Horton about his breakdown and retirement from baseball in 1997. In an article in the Baseball Digest, Madden wrote that Horton was working on telecommunications and living in the Pacific Palisades, California, but would not talk about his baseball career. Madden wrote that Horton tried to commit suicide while with the Indians, as reported by a Cleveland hotel owner where the attempt allegedly took place. Contacted February 2006 to ask Horton would be interviewed for his book on the 1967 Red Sox. Madden replied, "Tony Horton is a tragic story. If you read the piece I did on him, you'll understand that his breakdown was due to the pressure of never living up to his father's expectations. After the suicide attempt, I'm told doctors and psychiatric people told him that he had to sever all ties to baseball and that part of his life. That's why his old teammates and managers never heard from him again, and why he has become a bit of a recluse. I thought it was rather strange that Tony was living with his father at the time of my article." In July 2006, the author presented his research on Tony Horton at Sabres' annual convention in Seattle. A friend of Tony's was among those in attendance, and after the talk reported that Tony was in fact doing very well in business, but that the two had never discussed baseball. A couple of weeks after the convention, he asked Tony if he would be willing to talk about his time in baseball, but Tony was very clear that baseball was in his past and that he has no interest in revisiting that part of his life. We are happy to respect his wishes with this regard. Tony Horton's baseball career ended at the tender age of 25, just entering the prime of his career, and with 3 productive seasons behind him. His early career performance suggests that he might have been a fine player for many years. We will never know, and that's the story on Tony Horton. To think that the Red Sox had Horton and Calignero, and then just a couple of years later, they were gone. It's kind of heartbreaking, really. They should have played ball for many years. But sometimes it just doesn't work out. That's the story on Tony Horton.